Wealthy sheriff gave his paralyzed daughter away to humiliate. The rancher took her in and gave her back herself. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Sunlight spilled across the cracked dirt painting, long shadows from crooked fence posts and dry brush. The kind of land that didn't forgive, didn't forget, and neither did the man who walked it. Eli Decker was all bone and silence, a scarred war veteran with a limp and a stare that could stop a man mid-lie. He'd spent the last 7 years alone on this ranch, mending fences, feeding horses, and outliving grief. He didn't talk to folks, didn't go into town. He wasn't looking to be saved and certainly wasn't looking for company. Eli recognized the man before the wagon fully reached the clearing. Sheriff Mercer, his shoulders stiffened. The sheriff was a man who always seemed to be smiling at someone else's expense. Built big with a gray mustache that he waxed too neat for this territory. He had power in town, but Eli had never cared much for town. He didn't owe them anything, and they returned the favor. That was the arrangement. Eli set down the pliers slowly and waited as the wagon rolled to a halt. Sheriff Mercer didn't jump down right away. He pulled back the rez, let the horse settle, then leaned one elbow on his thigh like a man preparing to make a show of something. Behind him in the flat bed of the wagon sat a woman. She was upright, still covered in a light brown wool blanket, her back resting against a crate. Her face was turned away from Eli. Chin tilted slightly toward the hills, eyes unreadable in the glare. Her hair was long auburn, maybe chestnut and tangled at the ends like it hadn't seen a brush in some time. The dress she wore was beige, worn thin in places, torn at the neckline near the shoulder, loose around her bust clinging at the waist. She wasn't trying to hide herself. Sheriff Mercer slapped the wreaths against his knee and grinned. "Thought I dropped by," he said loud enough to fill the space. "Figured you could use some company." Eli didn't answer. The sheriff nodded toward the bed of the wagon. "CL, my daughter, you remember her?" Eli's eyes shifted once to the girl, then back to the sheriff. He remembered her vaguely years ago, riding side saddle through town with lace gloves and clean boots. But that had been before the accident, before she disappeared from public sight. "Horse fell on her," the sheriff said like it was a minor fact. "Snapped her back clean. Can't move her legs. Not since she was 22. She's 24 now. Doctors say she won't walk again." Eli didn't ask why he was being told this. The sheriff stretched, cracked his neck. "Truth is, she ain't much good to me like this. Costs money. Nurses quit." And hell, he laughed a little. "A man like you could use a woman around. You got no one. She's got no one. Makes sense, don't it?" Still, Eli said nothing. He didn't look at Clara. Not yet. He could feel her eyes now, though heavily guarded like a cornered animal waiting for the wrong move. That sense of someone forcing themselves to stay still. The sheriff climbed down from the wagon boots, hitting the dust with an arrogant thud. "No obligation, just figured I'd do you both a favor." Eli looked at him, then slow and steady. "You came all this way to hand me your daughter like livestock. She's fed, she's clothed, and she's still got a good face on her. If you're into that." Eli's jaw flexed slightly, then relaxed. He took a few steps forward until he reached the side of the wagon. His limp was clear now, one leg stiff from a knee down his steps careful. He looked at Clara directly for the first time. Her skin was pale but not unhealthy. Her cheekbones were sharp, her mouth full. Her eyes startlingly blue met his, with something halfway between pride and silent fury. He saw the tension in her jaw, the way her hands pressed in her lap, white-knuckled. "You want to be here?" Eli asked. It was quiet when he said it. Not for the sheriff, for her. She blinked, then nodded once. Not eager, just deliberate. That was enough. Eli turned without a word and walked toward his barn. The sheriff laughed behind him. "You really talking?" Just like that, Eli ignored him, found a pair of wide cedar planks leaning beside the chicken coop, dragged them across the dirt with slow, steady pulls, laid them down from the back of the wagon to the porch steps. When he returned to the wagon, Clara was watching him, her hand still gripping the blanket across her legs. He said nothing, just reached forward, one arm behind her back, the other under her knees. She didn't resist. She didn't help either. But when her weight settled against him, he felt how little she weighed. She had softness, still curves that pressed against his chest. But she was fragile in a way that made his grip instinctively tighten. He carried her up the ramp across the porch and into the cabin. Inside was plain a cot, a stove, a table, a few shelves clean, but used. She caught a glimpse of a small folded quilt on the bench by the fire, a rifle hanging above the mantel, a chipped enamel basin on a washstand, a life strip down to what was necessary. He set her gently on the cot and stepped back. She adjusted the blanket herself, keeping her posture upright. Her hands lingered near her chest, subtly pulling the torn neckline closer, though not quite hiding it. He watched her for a second longer, then turned away and walked back outside. By the time he returned, the wagon was already vanishing down the hill, dust trailing behind it. Eli stood in the yard and stared for a moment. Then he went to the barn, fed the horses, mended a latch, worked until the sun dipped low and shadows took shape along the ground. He didn't speak. He didn't think about what came next. Inside, Clara sat alone on the cot. Her eyes followed the cracks in the ceiling, the grain in the wooden walls. She could hear him moving outside, quiet but steady. She took slow breaths, the kind that came when you didn't know if you were safe but suspected you might be for the first time in a long while. She didn't know why he'd said yes. She didn't know what he wanted from her, if anything, but he hadn't looked at her legs. He hadn't winced. He hadn't touched her like others did, and somehow that was louder than anything else. The next morning broke quiet over the hills, the kind of silence that belonged to places far from roads, far from towns. Sunlight slanted across the cabins with floor dust, catching the light in thin lines. Eli had been awake for hours. He moved around the property without noise, feeding the cattle, checking the water pump, stacking the last of the dry wood inside the lean-to before the heat could climb. His movements were steady, practiced. It was the only way he knew how to think, by doing. Inside the cabin, Clara lay still on the cot, eyes open. She hadn't slept much. The mattress was firmer than she was used to, but that wasn't what kept her awake. It was the quiet, real quiet. Not the kind that came before a door slammed or footsteps thundered across a hallway, but the kind that stayed even after her breath stilled. There were no sharp voices, no creaking floorboards, no men outside her window pretending not to look inside, just the sound of wind through a cracked shutter and the faint creak of what's settling. She shifted on the bed as best she could, adjusting her arms under her to sit up straighter. The blanket had fallen partway down during the night, exposing the neckline of her dress again. She pulled it up, tucked the torn shoulder into the seam with a practice motion. She felt her cheeks flush a little, not from shame, but from being seen yesterday, really seen, and not by choice. She wasn't used to that kind of looking, not the kind that didn't ask or expect something. That man, Eli, he hadn't looked at her with hunger or pity, just awareness, like he saw she was there. And that was enough. The door creaked open. Eli stepped in carrying a tin cup of water and a cracked ceramic plate with a folded piece of cornbread and some beans. He set it down on the table near her without speaking. She watched him. He didn't meet her eyes. "I can feed myself," she said. He nodded and stepped back. She took a breath, then reached for the plate. Her fingers were steady, but her body didn't shift well without help. She braced herself with one hand on the bed frame and managed to pull the plate onto her lap. The beans were cold. She ate them anyway. Eli sat down on the chair by the stove and poured himself a cup of coffee from the tin pot resting on the coals. The room stayed quiet except for the sound of spoons against tin and the creak of the floor underweight. "Why'd you take me?" she asked finally, voice low, almost flat. He looked at her for the first time that morning. "You said yes," he said simply. "That's not a reason." It was enough. She stared at him a moment longer, trying to read something in his face, but he was hard to read. His eyes always quiet, his jaw always set. He wasn't avoiding her, but he wasn't inviting conversation either. Not a coldness, more like he didn't know what to say or how. "You don't ask many questions, do you?" He shrugged slightly. "Only when I need answers." Clara nodded to herself. That made more sense than anything she'd heard from man in years. Still, part of her didn't trust it. She had been passed between relatives and caretakers since the accident. Some cruel, some careless, most just tired of her presence. When her father left her here, she expected more of the same, maybe worse. She had braced for humiliation, for rejection, for cold indifference. Instead, this man built her a ramp. She looked around the room. "Where am I supposed to, go?" "There's a shed out back," Eli said. "I built a bench inside. I can help you get there." She frowned. "So you expected me to stay?" He didn't answer that right away. "I don't do charity," he said. "If someone's here, they help. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. But if you stay, you'll have your place. Not as a guest. Her eyes narrowed slightly. And what is this? Some kind of trade you feed me? I would do laundry from a chair. Warm your bed eventually. Eli's face didn't change. I didn't ask for that. She stared at him, waiting for some flicker of motive. But there was nothing, no shame, no insult, no desire, just steadiness. It unnerved her more than cruelty would have. I don't know what to do here, she muttered. You'll figure it out, he said, then stood and walked outside. She listened to the screen door creak, then shut again. Alone now, she looked down at her lap. Her hands trembled a little. She hadn't cried since before the accident. She wouldn't now, but she felt something move under her ribs that she hadn't let in for a long time. Possibility. By mid-morning, he returned with 2 planks and a box of nails. She watched through the open doorway as he measured out a section of porch just beyond the step. He worked without speaking, sweat forming under the brim of his hat. He drove nails in with long, precise swings, knelt slow because of his bad leg-adjusted boards by feel more than sight. She wheeled herself forward in the chair he had dragged in from the barn. It wasn't made for comfort, but it moved, and it was something she could do on her own. She rolled to the edge of the porch and looked down at the ground. You built that for me, she asked. You didn't stop hammering. Was going to build one for the coop? You needed it more. She didn't smile, but her throat tightened a little. I can wash vegetables, clean beans, if you bring them to me. He nodded without looking up. Good. Clara turned her chair and went back inside. Her hands trembled slightly on the wheels. Eli finished the ramp and leaned back to check the slope. He didn't say it aloud, but her offer to help mattered. Not because he needed it. He had done just fine alone, but because it meant she wasn't waiting to be saved. That night it didn't speak much. She peeled potatoes. He salted pork. They ate in silence. She asked if he'd always lived alone. He said, not always, and left it at that. As the sky turned dark outside and the oil lamp flickered inside the cabin, Eli sat by the window and cleaned his knife. Clara sat in the chair by the hearth, her hair down now, her eyes soft with thought. She didn't know what tomorrow would be like. But for the first time in 2 years, no one was expecting her to disappear, and that meant something. The third morning came with a sharp wind and a slate-colored sky that hinted at the season beginning to turn. Eli had already been outside before first light, checking the fencing along the east pasture where coyotes had been sniffing around. When he returned to the cabin, he found Clara at the wash basin with a damp cloth in one hand, wiping down the windowsill from her seated position. The chair he'd built for her was sturdier now, with wider wheels to handle the uneven floorboards and small reinforcements on the arms. He hadn't asked if she wanted it. She hadn't asked why he made it, but she used it, and that was enough for both of them. Clara noticed him standing at the doorway and straightened up slightly. Her hair was brushed back into a loose knot. The tear in her dress near the neckline had been stitched clumsily with blue thread from the kit he placed on a shelf days before. She hadn't said anything when she found it, but she had used it. Her chest still rose beneath the fabric when she breathed, but the dress fit cleaner now, less accidental, more deliberate. I found a broom, she said simply. Swept near the hearth. It's not much, but it's something. Eli nodded, removed his hat, and placed it on the peg by the door. It's enough. The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was what passed for conversation between them. Short, simple, honest. Clara looked down at the cloth, then at him. Why'd you fix the chair? He didn't sit, just leaned his hand on the edge of the table. You needed to move easier. I could have asked. You didn't have to. She studied his face. No smile, no warmth, but no hardness either. Just that quiet stillness he wore like an old coat. Clara's eyes flicked toward his leg. Then his left knee, how it didn't fully straighten when he moved. She had seen it, of course. Noticed how he favored one side. How stairs took him a second longer. What happened to your leg? She asked. He hesitated, then answered plainly. Gettysburg took a round through the knee. Doctor said I'd lose the leg. Didn't. But it's never been the same. She let that settle a moment. You fought for the Union. Didn't care much about sides, just signed up after they took my brother, and after the war went home. House had burned, wife and son inside. I didn't stay long. Her throat tightened. She hadn't expected him to tell her that. The way he said it flat, no emotion, it made it feel heavier somehow, like the weight hadn't gone away. just settled too deep to rise anymore. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded. "You don't have to be." Later that day, Eli hitched up the buckboard and told her he'd be gone for most of the afternoon. Supplies, flour, salt, maybe nails. She didn't ask if she could come. She knew better. Getting her in and out of that wagon would be near impossible without building something custom. And he wasn't the kind of man to ask someone like her to be stared at in town. Not if it could be helped. After he left, Clara wheeled herself to the back window and looked out across the land. Dust blew up in small spirals around the yard. The horizon looked endless. She still didn't know what this place was supposed to be for her. Not a home, not yet. But it wasn't a cage, and that alone made it different. Inside, she started sorting. The shelves were cluttered with loose tinware, empty jars, mismatched socks. She pulled a small wooden crate to the edge of the table and began placing things into categories. Order helped. It made her feel like the ground wasn't shifting beneath her all the time. While wiping the counter, her hand brushed against something that had been pushed to the far end. A stack of folded cloth. She unfolded one and found a dress not new but carefully sewn. Soft cotton, dark green, a bit large at the waist. The sleeves rolled once. A woman's dress. It had clearly been someone else's. She set it down slowly. Was it his wife's? There were no photographs around, no keepsakes, just that dress folded carefully and kept out of sight. When Eli returned, dusk had already crawled over the hills. He carried 2 sacks, one of flour, one of salt, and set them by the stove without a word. Clara didn't ask about the town, didn't ask who had seen him, if they'd said anything about her, but he volunteered something as he poured water into the kettle. Mercer was at the store. She looked up sharply. "What did he say?" Tried to laugh. Asked how the girl was adjusting. Said I'd regret it. Her jaw clenched. "And what did you say I didn't?" She lowered her gaze. "He thinks I'm some punishment. Something you're supposed to grow tired of." Eli stirred the kettle with the edge of spoon, then said quietly, "He don't know much." That night, Clara changed into the green dress. It was loose in the middle, but the bodice hugged her just right, and the color made her skin look less pale. When she wheeled herself into the kitchen, Eli glanced at her and then back to the fire. No reaction, but she saw something shift in his shoulders. Tension, then something else. Something like stillness finding comfort. "Your wife's?" she asked. He shook his head once. "No, belonged to her sister. She stayed here a while after the fire before she moved east." She nodded slowly. "I'll fix the waste if you don't mind me keeping it. It's yours." They ate dinner in silence, but it wasn't heavy, just quiet. She had peeled potatoes again, and he'd salted some fresh meat from a rabbit he'd snared. Afterward, he washed the plates and she dried them. Before bed, as Eli moved to place more wood in the fire, Clara's voice stopped him. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" He paused, the log still in his hands. "Used to, and now there's someone else here." She didn't say anything, just looked at him. The fire popped in the hearth, throwing orange light across his face. He looked tired, weathered, but alive in a way he hadn't seen that first day. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. Morning came gray and quiet, with a light mist hanging over the ranch, the kind that made the wooden boards of the porch sweat and the horses restless in the barn. Clara stirred earlier than usual. Her body ached from the waist up. Muscle she hadn't used in years, slowly beginning to wake. She didn't complain. She pushed herself upright in the bed, adjusted the green dress, now cinched at the waist with a makeshift belt she had sewn from an old saddle strap, and wheeled herself toward the stove where the cold from last night still gave off a faint warmth. She moved with a quiet purpose now. Her hands were sure. There was still a slowness in her shoulders, the instinct of someone expecting to be interrupted or watched too closely. But Eli never hovered, never corrected her, never touched without asking. He came in a little after sunup, his coat damp from fog, carrying a wooden bucket full of eggs. Clara reached for a pan and set it on the stove before he could. He paused just for a second, watching her, then set the bucket down without a word and stepped back. "Rain's coming," he said. She nodded. "I could feel it in my arms last night. They get tight." "You hurting? Not bad, just stiff." He poured himself a cup of coffee. She cracked 3 eggs into the pan. Eli leaned against the doorframe, silent for a while. Then he said, "Twa, we'll talk about you soon." Clara didn't stop what she was doing. They've always talked. Not like this. You being here with me? She slid the pan slightly to keep it from burning. Let him talk. His eyes rested on her a moment longer. Then he nodded once. After breakfast, Eli spent most of the day reinforcing the roof over the barn. Clara stayed inside sorting through what supplies they had, labeling jars, organizing beans and dried corn, sharpening the old kitchen knife on a flat stone, the way she'd seen her aunt do when she was a child. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need it anymore. That afternoon, the clouds finally opened. Rain fell hard, sudden, and loud on the tin roof. Clara wheeled herself to the door and watched it come down in thick sheets, drenching the land. Out in the field, she could just barely see Eli walking back toward the cabin, coat soaked. His limp more pronounced now, with a mud sucking at his boots. When he stepped onto the porch, she had already laid a dry cloth over the chair by the door and a towel on the table. He looked at her surprised. I ain't helpless, she said. Didn't say you were. She reached for the towel and handed it to him. As he took it, their fingers touched, brief, warm, steady. He looked at her and didn't pull away right away. I'll heat up the stew, she said. He didn't stop her. That evening they ate beside the fire. The rain hadn't let up. The room smelled of wood smoke and meat, and the only sounds were the patter of rain and the occasional crack from the fire. After dinner, she folded the towels, wiped down the table, and poured them each a cup of coffee. Eli didn't talk much, but that night he said something unexpected. You always this stubborn? Clara sipped her cup slowly. I had to be. My father didn't care much for daughters who asked questions. After the accident, he treated me like I'd already died. Like I embarrassed him just by breathing. Eli didn't flinch, just nodded slightly. He's a coward. She glanced at him. He's a sheriff. Still a coward. The firelight flickered across the room. Clara shifted in her chair, her voice low. You didn't ask what happened that day when the horse threw me. I figured you'd tell me if it mattered. It wasn't just the fall. I was running. There was someone my father didn't approve of. I'd been meeting him in secret. He found out. We argued. I ran. Horse bucked. My spine cracked on a rock. Eli took that in without blinking. Man you were meeting. He leave. Clara's mouth flattened. He never came to the house. Never visited the hospital. Never wrote. My father said that's what you get for crawling into the arms of weak men. Eli's jaw tightened. He's wrong. She watched him. You think I'm broken? No, he said without hesitation. Just tired like me? She lowered her eyes chest. Sometimes I don't know what I'm still fighting for. For yourself, Eli said. That's enough. Later, as she was preparing for bed, he stopped near the door, not quite ready to leave the room. I can build you something better. A bench, something you can use out there for planting if you want. She looked at him. You think I'm staying? You haven't rolled away yet? Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Then yes, I want it. And then without planning it, without thinking too long, she reached for his hand, not to pull him closer, just to touch, to say she was still here. Eli didn't pull away. He let her fingers wrap around his. And for a moment there was no sheriff, no accident, no past, just two people who hadn't run. The rain cleared overnight, leaving the air clean and the ground slick with fresh mud. By sunrise, the sun had broken through and was warming the porch slats. A few birds pecked at puddles near the corral. Inside the cabin, Clara sat by the open window, a tin mug of warm water in her hands, listening to the quiet. Her fingers traced the rim slowly. She was dressed in the green cotton dress, again, now properly fitted at the waist. Her hair was pinned back simply, not for anyone, just to feel neat, clean, like she belonged in her own skin again. Eli was already outside, hammering in fence stakes on the north side, where the rain had loosened the posts. Clara could hear the sharp rhythm of each blow, consistent, steady. She had started to learn his routines. He didn't talk when he worked, didn't hum, didn't mutter. He just did. And somehow that helped her breathe easier. By late morning, Eli came back into the cabin, arms streaked with dirt, a faint line of sweat beneath the collar of his shirt. He washed up at the basin, then looked over at her. "You've been out yet today?" he asked. She shook her head. "Thought I'd wait till the mud dried some. My wolves don't like getting stuck." He gave one small nod and grabbed a rag to dry his face. Then he hesitated. "I built the bench out past the coop." Clara's brow lifted slightly. That was fast. Didn't sleep much. She didn't ask why. She just rolled herself toward the door, and he followed her down the ramp. The morning sun hit her legs as she rolled, warming the fabric of her dress. Her hands gripped the wheels firmly, guiding herself down onto the dirt path. Out past the chicken coop set against the fence line near a patch of open ground was a wooden bench, low, sturdy, with a flat surface, long enough to hold tools or baskets. A half-built planting box sat beside it. She wheeled closer and rested her hand on the smooth wood. "You did this last night." He nodded. She looked at him. Why? He met her eyes without hesitation. "You said you wanted to stay. I figured that meant you wanted to work." Her chest tightened to the words. She turned her attention to the planting box. "We could do herbs here. Maybe onions come spring." Eli crouched beside the box, testing one of the corners. "We can start clearing this side tomorrow." She smiled just faintly. "It's been a long time since anyone let me build something. Now you can." They stayed outside most of the day. Clara practiced moving her chair over uneven ground. Eli hauled in extra planks. Let her sort through them and choose what to keep. At one point, when she reached too far and tipped the chair slightly, he was at her side instantly. His hand steadied the armrest, his other at her back. "I've got it," she muttered. "I know," he said, but he didn't let go until she was righted. That evening, they returned to the cabin just before sundown. Eli brought in kindling while Clara wiped down the table. Bait supper slowly. She asked about the ridge east of the property, and he told her it led to the creek about 2 miles out. "Ever fish?" he asked. "I used to with my cousin before the accident." "We'll go sometime," he said, as if it were already settled. After they finished eating, she rolled toward the fire, setting her mug on the floor beside her. Eli sat across from her, working a leather strap through a rusted buckle. "You never told me why you left town for good," she said. He didn't look up. After the fire, there wasn't anything left there. Folks stared. They meant well, but they stared. She nodded. "I know that stare." He glanced at her, and something in his face softened just enough to make the silence feel warmer than words. "You think folks will come looking for me again?" she asked. Eli considered it. "Maybe, but not right away. Mercer's pride won't let him admit he gave you up. Not unless he's drunk or angry. He's both most nights." Eli didn't respond. Clara leaned forward slightly. "You don't want to ask what it was like in town in that house. I figured if you ever needed to say it, you would." She took a breath. "He made me stay upstairs most days. Didn't want anyone seeing me in a chair. Said it made him look weak. Once he told me to wear a shawl to hide my arms. Said I looked sick. One night when he was drunk, he told me he wished I died when I fell." Eli's jaw clenched slow and hard. "He said I'd ruined his name," she added, "as if I did it on purpose." He looked at her, truly looked, and said, "That man doesn't know the first thing about you." Her voice was quieter then. "I used to wonder if anyone ever would." "I do," Eli said, steady and without hesitation. The room was still. The fire cracked once in the hearth. She reached for her mug again, but her fingers hesitated. Instead, she placed him flat on her lap and looked across at him. "Would you help me with something?" she asked. "What is it?" "I want to sit beside you. On the floor, not in this chair." He paused, then stood slowly and walked over. Carefully, he knelt beside her, slid one arm under her knees, the other behind her shoulders. She braced herself as he lifted her arms, circling his neck, not out of need, but for balance. He lowered her onto a blanket she had laid out earlier, right in front of the fire. She leaned into him, just slightly steadying herself, her side pressed against his, for a moment longer than needed. He didn't move away. "I don't want to be looked at like I'm broken anymore." She whispered, "You're not." He turned to look at her. Her face was soft in the firelight, the tear in the corner of her. "I didn't fall." He reached up, slow and careful, and brushed her hair back behind her ear. Then he leaned in, steady and unhurried, and kissed her once, firm, warm, honest. She let herself kiss him back. They didn't speak after that. They just sat there side by side on the floor, letting the heat of the fire and each other do the rest. The next morning, the cabin was quiet in a different way. Not silent like before, not weighed down with uncertainty or distance, but still settled. The kind of quiet that came after something unspoken had shifted between two people. Something real. Eli woke early as he always did. He stood at the edge of the bedroom where he'd slept on the floor again, not far from the fireplace. Claire was still sleeping on the cot. He had carried her back there after she nodded off beside the fire the night before. Her weight had surprised him again, not for its lightness, but for how natural it felt to hold her like she fit there in his arms. No part of it had felt strange. Now with her breathing slow and her face turned toward the window light, he watched her for a moment longer than usual. Then he stepped outside into the cold morning. Clara woke to the smell of wood smoke and bacon. The cabin was warmer than usual, the stove already going a pan set up for breakfast. She sat up slowly, adjusting the straps of her dress, which had slipped slightly off one shoulder in the night. She fixed it with a quiet hand, then reached for the small mirror above the washstand. Her hair was tangled at the ends, her eyes heavy with sleep, but her face looked different now, less guarded, more sure. When Eli stepped back in, she was already at the table, pulling her chair close. "You sleep all right?" he asked. She nodded. "Better than most nights. My back wasn't as tight. You said you used to sew. That's still true." She looked up, curious. "Yes, what? Found a roll of canvas in the barn. Thought maybe you could help make some new saddle covers." "Mine re-tearing. I can do that." They ate together in silence, but a different kind of silence now. One that held comfort. Later that day, Clara worked at the table stretching canvas marking patterns with a bit of chalk Eli had carved. The wind outside had picked up, and the sky turned a dry yellow-gray. A storm was likely coming again, but for now the weather held. As she worked, she asked, "Eli, you said your wife died in the fire. Did you ever talk to her folks after that?" He paused from splitting kindling near the stove. "Once her brother rode out here, blamed me for what for not being there. I was in Tucson looking for fencing wire. Fire started from the hearth. Chimney flue was cracked. No one knew." Clara lowered her hands. "And your son barely too. They were both asleep." She didn't say anything after that. She didn't need to. She just looked at him, saw the weight in his shoulders, and let him finish without interruption. He didn't like pity. She understood that now. "After that, I didn't talk to anyone for almost a year," he said. "Just worked. Fixed things that didn't need fixing. Sat at the table with no food on it. And now I talk to you." She smiled faintly and reached out to touch his hand on the table. He let her. That afternoon, a rider came down the trail. Clara saw him first through the window and felt her chest tighten. A young man, maybe 20, wearing a town deputy badge and riding a lean sorrel horse. Eli stepped out before the man dismounted. "You Decker?" the deputy asked. Eli nodded. "Sheriff Mercer sent a message. Said he wants the girl returned by week's end. Says he was generous, but it's time she comes home." Eli's eyes didn't change. "She's not going back. She's his daughter. She's a grown woman." The deputy looked uncomfortable. "I'm just passing the message." "You did." Without another word, the young man turned the horse around and rode off. When Eli stepped back inside, Clara was sitting stiffly in the chair by the table. "So he want me back," she said. "He doesn't get a say. I figured he'd come eventually." Eli looked at her. "You scared not of him," she said. "I'm scared of being taken away from this, from you. From this quiet, you're not going anywhere." She looked at him closely. "You believe that?" "Yes." That night she sat by the fire again, closer to him now. The distance between them had shortened in every sense. She leaned against him without hesitation, her shoulder pressed to his, her hand resting near his knee. He turned his head slightly and spoke low. "I haven't been with a woman since before the fire. I haven't been with a man since before the fall." He looked at her, then really looked. Her hand moved to his chest, slow, deliberate. Her eyes didn't leave his. "Do you want me?" she asked. "Yes," he said, quiet but sure. "Then touch me." Eli leaned in steady and controlled and kissed her deeper this time. No hesitation. His hands cupped her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. She pulled him closer, arms sliding over his shoulders, anchoring herself to him like she'd waited years to feel this solid. His mouth moved to her neck, to her collarbone, fingers tracing the edge of her neckline, then resting against the skin where her dress had torn days ago. Clara let her breath deepen. Her body had limits, but her desire didn't. He lifted her again, slow and firm, and laid her down gently on the cot. The lamplight flickered across the room. She guided his hand to her waist, and his touch was careful, reverent. They undressed without speaking, slowly, letting every movement be known deliberate. When he touched her, truly touched her, he did so like she wasn't broken. And when she held him like he hadn't already been taken from once before. They stayed that way well into the night, wrapped in shared breath and silence. No promises spoken, no fears voiced, just presence, just the quiet, solid act of staying. The morning after was still windless. The air held the faint smell of burned cedar from the fireplace and the weight of something that had shifted but didn't need explaining. Eli stirred first, sitting on the edge of the cot in the dim gray light filtering through the window. He looked down at Clara, still wrapped in the quilt, her hair loose over one shoulder, her breathing even. Her dress was folded neatly on the chair beside the bed. He had never known quiet to feel this full. He stood dressed slowly, then stepped outside. The sky was low with cloud cover, but the light had that clear, open quality that came after days of rain. A few sparrows perched along the corral post, chirping softly. Inside, Clara woke to the sound of the screen door easing shut. She stretched her arms, adjusted the blanket over her chest, and sat up as best she could. Her body was sore, but not from pain. More like her muscles had remembered something they thought was gone. She dressed and brushed out her hair with the small ivory handle brush she'd found in the bottom drawer days ago. She caught her reflection in the cracked mirror. There was a softness in her eyes she hadn't seen in years. She didn't look like someone passing through anymore. She looked rooted. Eli returned as she was fixing the collar of her dress. "Coffee's hot," he said. She nodded. "I'll bring the cups." They moved in quiet rhythm, two people who now shared something unspoken but steady, over breakfast. They didn't talk about the night. They didn't need to. Later that morning, Clara worked in the garden bed while Eli sawed wood for a new gate panel. The garden wasn't much yet, just a patch of cleared earth with some row markers she laid out using sticks and twine. But it was hers. She braced her body across the bench he'd built and dug with a trowel, slow but determined. Her arms ached, but she didn't stop. At midday, Eli brought her water and sat beside her in the dirt. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand and glanced over at the fence line. "He'll come himself next time," he said. She didn't ask who. She knew. "I'm not going with him," she said, calm and sure. "I know, but if he rides out here angry, he won't come alone." Clara wiped her palms on a rag. "You'd fight him. I'd protect what's mine." She looked at him. "Is that what I am?" He turned to her. "If you want to be," she didn't answer with words. Just reached over, rested her hand on his. By dusk, the clouds had thickened and wind began to push in from the west. Eli secured the barn doors while Clara finished drying the wash. As she hung a final cloth on the line, she noticed movement in the distance. Two riders coming slow down the trail. She narrowed her eyes, heart tightening. "Eli!" She called out, her voice low but urgent. He stepped around the barn, rifle already in hand. The two riders came into full view, Sheriff Mercer and one of his deputies. Clara recognized the wide shoulders and clean, smug shape of her father's posture, even from a distance. They stopped 20 paces from the house. "Thought I'd find you still here," Mercer called. Eli stood between the house and Clara, his stance wide. "You were told." Mercer dismounted, boots crunching dry grass. "That's my daughter. I didn't give you leave to keep her. She's not property," Eli said flatly. "She's under my name, under my roof until I say otherwise." "Not anymore." Clara wheeled forward, then placing herself in line with Eli, her eyes locked on her father's. "You made that clear when you left me here like a sack of wheat," she said. His face hardened. "I was trying to give you a chance. No, you're getting rid of something you didn't know how to deal with." He stepped forward. "You don't understand. I understand enough. I know you were embarrassed by me. I know you couldn't stand that I didn't walk or smile on cue or make you look good in town. You're confused," Mercer snapped. "This man's using you." Eli didn't move. His rifle was still at his side, steady, not raised. "I've never used her," he said. "I listened. I stayed." Mercer looked at Clara. "You're coming home." "No," his jaw clenched. "You'll regret this. I've already lived through worse." The deputy shifted uncomfortably on his saddle. "Sheriff enough," Mercer muttered. He looked at Eli, and for a moment his face shifted, not in a softness, but into realization. He wasn't going to win this one. "You'll hear from me again," he said, stepping back to his horse. "You do that," Eli said. They rode off without another word. Clara let out a breath, her hands trembling slightly. "You all right?" Eli asked. She nodded. "Just tired of ghosts." Eli reached for her hand again. You're safe here." She looked at him, and this time she smiled. Not polite, not forced, real. The days that followed settled into a rhythm again, but it was different now, firmer, more certain. Mercer hadn't returned, and the deputy hadn't ridden back up the trail either. Still, Eli kept his rifle oiled and within arm's reach. He didn't say it out loud, but Clara could see it in how often he glanced at the horizon, how he moved with more caution when he walked the fence line. She didn't question it. She understood what it meant for a man like him to live always expecting something to be taken from him. Clara didn't sit idle. Each morning she wheeled out to the garden bench and picked up where she'd left off. The soil was slowly giving way under her hands, and she was learning the lay of it. What parts stayed wetter, where the wind hit hardest, where the morning sun was strongest. Eli had shown her how to check the dirt for moisture, how to press seeds in without burying them too deep. She wasn't just tending something. She was building something that might stay. One evening while she worked the rows, Eli joined her with 2 tin mugs of cooled coffee. He handed her one, then sat beside her on the bench. "You planning on planting all of Arizona?" he asked. She smiled slightly. "Just enough so we don't have to eat dried beans every night." "That bad, huh? I've had worse." They sat in silence, sipping coffee, watching the wind move through the hills. Clara shifted slightly, her fingers tracing the handle of the mug. "Do you think I'll ever be more than this? I mean more than just the body in a chair." Eli looked at her. "You already are." She met his eyes. "You say that like it's simple." "It is." He said, "You want to stay alive. You work. You care about things. That's more than most folks ever do." Her throat tightened a little. "You've never asked if I wanted to leave. You would have said so if you did. I don't." "I know." He reached over and rested his hand over hers. "But if you ever do, I won't stop you. I'd take you to town myself. Find you a better place. Make sure you had what you needed." "I already have what I need," she said, steady now. "Steady. You stayed. No one else ever did that." That night she bathed by firelight. Eli carried the water and poured it gently into the basin near the hearth. He didn't watch her undress. He didn't have to. She let her dress fall from her shoulders, her body marked by time and healing. But she didn't cover herself when he returned with a clean cloth. She looked at him as she was, and he met her with the same stillness he always had. Afterwards, she rolled in a bed beside him. Not on the cot anymore, but on the larger frame they'd moved into the corner of the room after Eli built it with his own hands. They lay together under a shared blanket. Her head rested against his chest. His hand ran gently over her hip, down the curve of her waist. He leaned in and kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her mouth, slow but firm, lingering like he knew exactly what he wanted, and had finally allowed himself to want it. Her body responded to his without fear. She guided his touch. He let her lead. When he entered her, she gasped softly, not from pain, but from how carefully he moved, how wholly he was with her. They didn't speak through it. They didn't need to. The room was full of breath and warmth and the creak of the bed and the ache of lies that had been live alone for too long. After she curled into him and he wrapped both arms around her like a man holding something he didn't plan to let go of. "You still afraid he'll come back?" she whispered. "No," Eli said, "because if he does, he won't find the same woman." She rested her chin on his chest and looked up at him. "I don't want to be your burden." "You're not. I don't want to be your obligation either. You're not that either." "Then what am I?" He touched her face, thumb brushing just under her eye. "You're mine and I'm yours. That's all?" The oil lamp flickered low. She smiled for the second time that day. A real smile, not because someone told her to, not because she owed it, but because she felt it. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, the room quiet, the garden dark outside the land holding its breath. They didn't know it yet, but the final test was coming, and they were ready. The sun rose hard and clear the next morning, pouring gold over the dry earth like it was trying to burn away whatever shadows had lingered overnight. Eli was already outside before first light, checking the perimeter again. He hadn't said it out loud, but Clara could feel it. Something had shifted in him since Mercer's visit. He moved with more purpose now, not frantic, not scared, but alert, like a man who'd been marked and was waiting for it to happen again. Inside, Clara sat at the table, threading the last buttons onto a canvas sack. Her movements were steady, arms stronger now, shoulders more defined. Her hair was tied back in a firm knot face, clean, clear-eyed. The woman who had first arrived, slumped in a wagon bed, no longer existed, and she knew it. When Eli came through the door, his jaw was tight. "Riders!" he said, her chest tensed. "How many? 3. Coming slow, but they're armed. Mercer's horse is in front." Clara didn't flinch. "What do you want me to do?" "Stay inside. Lock the door. If anything happens—" "No," she said. "I'm not hiding." Eli looked at her long. "This isn't pride. This is danger. And I'm not some fragile thing you have to tuck under a blanket anymore." They held each other's gaze. Finally, he nodded once and then, "Stay behind me. Don't move unless I say." By the time the riders reached the yard, Eli was already waiting on the porch, rifle leaning against the post, but his hands free. Clara wheeled herself just behind him, half in the shadow of the doorway. Mercer climbed down from his horse like he was dismounting for a parade. He wore his badge pinned proud and bright, but his face was tight with anger. "I told you I'd be back," he said. "And I told you she wasn't going anywhere," Eli replied. Mercer's eyes darted toward Clara. "She's not in her right mind. She's been manipulated." "I'm right here," Clara said, her voice calm but sharp. "If you got something to say about me, say it to me." Mercer turned fully toward her, surprised by the steel in her tone. "You think he loves you? You think this is anything but pity? Look at you." "I did," she said. "Every day for months. And for the first time, I like what I see." Mercer's mouth twitched. "I have legal standing." "No, you don't. Eli said she's of age. She's not under your roof. She stays because she chooses to. You don't get to keep her just because you dragged her into your bed." "You gave her up," Eli said. "I didn't force a thing. You did that the day you loaded her in that wagon and left her in my door like a stray animal." Mercer reached for his holster. "Just a touch." Eli stepped forward, voice steady. "Don't. You know I'm faster." The moment stretched. Clara didn't blink. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Father, and you're not ashamed of me. You're ashamed of yourself, of how you treated me when I needed you most." The deputy beside Mercer, same young man from before, looked between the two, then slowly stepped his horse back a pace. He didn't want a part in what was about to happen. Mercer's fingers twitched. Eli's hand dropped to the rifle, but he didn't raise it yet. Mercer looked at Clara one last time, and something in his face cracked. Maybe pride, maybe control. He saw that he'd already lost. Not just the argument, her. She wasn't coming back. He spit into the dirt bitter, then turned back toward his horse. "You stay out here and rot with him if that's what you want. Just don't expect anyone to save you when it turns bad." "I never needed saving," Clara said. "Just someone who wouldn't leave." They rode off. The dust settled slowly, but the weight lifted fast. Eli turned toward her. His face looked like it hadn't moved at all during the exchange, but his shoulders eased just slightly. "You all right?" he asked. Claire nodded. "Better than I've ever been?" He crouched down beside her, his hand on the wheel of her chair, the other brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "He won't be back. That was the last of it." "I know," she said, "because this is home now and I'm not giving that up." Later that week, they planted onions in the garden. The earth was soft from recent rains. Clara worked with sleeves rolled up, sweat at her temples. Eli moved beside her, steady as ever. They spoke little, but they didn't need to. She ran the books for the ranch now, writing, counting, planning what needed trading. Eli handed over every scrap of money to her without question. She kept the numbers tidy. No one had ever trusted her like that. In town, word had spread. Some folks laughed behind their hands. Others watched Eli wearily when he came in for salt or nails. But nobody spoke to his face, and nobody dared ride out to the ranch again. That summer, Clara carved a small wooden sign and nailed it to the front gate. Decker Ranch, not as a name of ownership, but as a name of choice. She wasn't Clara Mercer anymore. She was Claire Decker, and she had chosen that name. In early fall, her hands moved to her stomach while she rested in bed, her palms still. Eli lay beside her, arm draped loosely over her hip. "I think I might be," she whispered. He looked at her. "I'm late and I've been sick twice this week." Eli didn't smile. Not at first, but his eyes filled with something deeper. "You sure?" She nodded slowly. "Not yet, but I think so." He moved closer, kissed her forehead, then her lips. "You're not broken," he said softly. "No." she replied, pressing her hand to his. I never was. They stayed like that. Two people who weren't looking for miracles, just for a place to stay, and someone to stay with, and they found both. The wind moved softly across the hills and the land held them steady. This time nothing was being taken. This time they were keeping it. The end.